Welcome to the Dead Headspace. Why'd I write?
Woo! You got almost 3 words in.
Look, man, most guests don't make me nervous, but I got the jitters with you. I really liked your writing. Sorry, I can't. I got to get it out early. This is the 80th episode we've recorded, man. What's wrong with me? Welcome to Dead Headspace, now a part of Silver Shamrock Horrorcast, a podcast network that includes Killing Time with Silver Shamrock and Unburying the Dead, where we exhume classic horror paperbacks for the new generation. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Ghana, YouTube, and all other major platforms. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're talking to the author of Moon of the Crusted Snow, Waubgeshig Rice. Say hi, Wab.
Hi there, Patrick and Brennan and everybody else.
How's it going, man? So, like I was saying before we started recording, really excited to be talking to you. And real quick shout out to our friend of the show, Shane Hawk. He was the one that put you on our radar. I'm very thankful for that. Also, he put on my radar Tommy Orange. You got there. Haven't read it yet, but very much looking towards that.
Right on.
Indigenous horror. I've never thought of that term before, and I'm not claiming to invent it. I just
I should hope not.
Oh God, bad look for white guys. Sorry, man. Terrible way to start out this episode. What? You seem like you're into horror. I've never asked you. I didn't see anything online, so I'm just gonna come out. Are you into horror?
Yeah, I'm into horror. I wouldn't say I'm deeply into horror, although it has been an influence on me basically my entire life, right? And I wouldn't say at all I'm a casual horror fan, because I think casual just insinuates that you dip in and you dip out, at your own leisure, just for giggles now and then. But anytime I've ever consumed anything horrific, whether it's a film or a book or a graphic novel or anything else, I've just really appreciated the art form, not just in the sense of really going to dark places, but understanding humanity. And I think that's what I've always really enjoyed about the horror genre, no matter what the platform was, right? So yeah, I'd say it's been a constant in my life. And it's just been really fun to explore, I guess, horrific scenes or scary scenarios in my own writing over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about Moon of the Crusted Snow a little later on, but I just want to say the experience I had, it just kind of felt like the closest, which is what all great fiction does, is you kind of bridge from one's culture, walk of life to another. It felt like wherever you were when you wrote this, or if we were around a campfire, that you were kind of just telling the story, and it felt like you don't want to look away from the fire because it's all dark around it. It's scary because Scott's fucking around the corner.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious as to your kind of genesis story of storytelling in general. Did you have guardians or older siblings, or what really got you into it?
Oh, well, I would say storytelling really formed my identity as an Anishinaabe person, and I guess as a quote-unquote professional storyteller, both as a journalist and an author. And that goes back to my upbringing in the 1980s on the reserve. I'm from a place called Wasauksing First Nation, which is near Parry Sound, Ontario. It's about a 2-hour drive north of Toronto, and it's on Georgian Bay, which is off of Lake Huron, right? So, my community has obviously a long history of being displaced and colonized, and as a result, there was forced separation from culture and from just traditional Anishinaabe family and community values, right? Indigenous nations right across this land have similar stories. But for me, I was fortunate to grow up in a time when my community really made a concerted effort to reclaim some of the culture and history that had been taken from us. And a big part of that was the storytelling. My earliest memories are of sitting around with elders or sitting around with elder family members and just learning about being Anishinaabe, learning about the old stories that used to be spoken all the time, in our community and in our land, and really feeling connected with my roots as a result, right? So I was fortunate that I, had a keen understanding of the importance of storytelling as a result of that. And it was like, I guess it was outside of the sort of mainstream formats that I had become familiar with as a child, like film and books and so on. This was like an oral sort of spoken experience, right? And I just really appreciated and enjoyed that, and that stayed with me my whole life. And by the time, I got to high school, I went to high school off reserve. Just being in English class and really connecting with books in an additional way, I guess, more of a critical way, really got me into that sort of method of storytelling too. And I just found creative writing to be a really fun hobby for me when I was just a teenager on the res, right? So I would write like for fun, just things about growing up on the res, funny things, weird things, scary things, and happy things, of course, but never really saw that turning into any sort of career or anything like that, right? But yeah, as the years went on, I got to know Indigenous authors. I had an aunt who was really keen on introducing me to the works of Indigenous authors, and that's sort of what really planted the seed. And I just kept writing in my spare time. I was fortunate to start a career as a journalist, and I did that for a long time. But all the while, I was doing all this fiction writing in my spare time. So yeah, to answer your question, it goes back to my upbringing on the res and just really connecting with different ways to tell stories over the years.
Oral storytelling. There's something really special about. I mean, that's how our people started. That's how you.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The expression of written word and literacy, it really didn't become a thing until Gutenberg in the 1500s. Yeah. So it's in the scheme of the human race, timeline wise, it's fairly new.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I totally agree. Like we Indigenous people more broadly talk about how we come from an oral tradition, but everybody does. Cultures around the world come from an oral tradition, right? And those stories were passed down for thousands of years, as you said, before, the printing press was invented. Of course, there was like different interpretations of writing scripture on walls and in art and so on. But this method of reading words on a page is really fairly recent, as you point out. So yeah, I always try to point that out too. It's not just an Indigenous thing; it's a worldwide thing.
It's really neat seeing how smart humans were before, technology and whatnot. I mean, I went to school for computer electronics, and I was learning, the equations that a lot of them I don't remember because I don't use most of them now. But these were equations invented a few hundred years ago. You got all these types of electrical and mechanical systems. All that was, you use your brain. You don't even have a calculator.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating just because I love history and seeing the similarities between one culture and another that weren't even connected, completely isolated from each other. It's fascinating, man. So, yeah. Brendan, I'm kind of branching out into weird territories. Why don't you pick up, buddy?
No, you know what? I think we both kind of honed in on the same thing in that answer, and that was the oral storytelling. And I was curious because, we just talked about the root of humanity coming up on oral storytelling, but you're saying you grew up on a res in the 80s. And that's, for the most part, that's something that's, kind of been lost. I would imagine there aren't very many people, around our age that really have a lot of recollection, partaking in oral storytelling. I'm kind of curious from your perspective, and be it as a listener or as a storyteller yourself, what are your key differences between oral and, writing?
Well, that's a good question. I think with well, and Patrick noted this earlier, and I was very, very honored by this analysis, Patrick. That you said reading my book was like having someone tell it to you. And I do really try to emulate that in my writing, and part of that is not just vocalizing the words as I type them out, but thinking about what could be believable in a sort of storytelling setting, right? And I think part of that is my own relationship with the English language and how I perceive it. Like for me, I've made a living off of English. It is like I come from a mixed background, right? Like my dad is Anishinaabe and my mom is a white Canadian, so English is part of my heritage for sure. But in terms of how I view it in relation to my indigenous language, to Anishinaabe, like I have more of an emotional connection to Anishinaabe, mostly because I don't speak it fluently. That was a language that was separated from my family and my people and so on. And it means more to me to try to revive that. But with English, I've learned how to use it over the years. Like I've learned how to use it to make a living, as a journalist and then as a fiction author. And the stories I heard growing up, like in that oral tradition, were all in English with a little bit of Anishinaabe or Ojibwe, as it's also called here and there. But yeah, like in terms of how I try to adapt that to the written word, it is trying to consider how something would be shared if I was to speak it to somebody else. But also that's sort of inspired by how I've received the stories of my culture and how I try to incorporate those into the written word. Like I wouldn't like try to dress them up in any sort of like fancy or verbose way at all, because that's not how they're told. It would, if I took like an old like legend or like a trickster story and sort of wrote it as if I was doing like a PhD in English lit and took it back to the res, people would laugh at me and they'd be like, what's this shit, man? What are you trying to do here, kind of thing, right? So part of that is like, it's really weird to consider it that way, but part of it is like respecting the story by keeping it as straightforward as possible in English, but yeah, a big part of that too is I try to incorporate as much Ojibwe words as possible to sort of reclaim that in some way too, so yeah, it's something I think about a lot, and I don't necessarily know if I've figured out how to do it. Like I consider my process still a learning one, and it will be until the day I die, right? I don't think I'll ever totally figure this out, but I guess just engaging in that internal discussion and I guess reaching out to my peers and my family who are storytellers to guide me in that way is really helpful too. But yeah, it is a big part of the consideration when I'm actually starting to write, right?
You know what? I loved the part about kind of keeping it simple, not dressing it up. And when one of the main reasons, I wanted to ask that question was I have no experience with oral storytelling, and judging by the amount of editing that I've got to do after I write something, I imagine I'd be pretty bad at it right off the cuff. So I'm wondering if you are actively trying to kind of capture that feeling of oral storytelling. Is it more about kind of pouring it onto the page in that simple fashion, or going back and trying to craft it into, to capture that moment, I suppose?
Yeah, good question too. I would say you're an oral storyteller. You both are. You have this podcast, and I've heard the way you engage in stories with your guests, and you guys, everybody has it in them, essentially, I believe, right? And the fact that you're doing this great podcast is testament to that. But yeah,
you're gonna make me blush, man. I'm sorry, I had to cut you in. My God,
it's not a pretty sight when he blushes.
No, I mean, you're such a great storyteller. I've read, this book, and it's so good. I'm sorry, I had to cut you off for that.
Oh, no, that's all good. I appreciate it. But I was just saying, I'm not just buttering you guys up. Like, I'm not expecting like
already chubby enough
or anything like that, right? But Yeah, I think for the process, what I'm doing right now is I'm writing the sequel to Moon of the Crusted Snow, right? And yeah, that's very much it. I'm just writing out the story as not as quickly as I can, but just to have it there so that I can go back and sort of do, not necessarily refining, but I guess tightening things up for pacing and maybe for like believability, and also I guess. Well, before I go into it, like a big part of my process is trying to ensure that I remember the whole story before I actually write it down. So I'll spend months like telling the story to myself in my head, saying, okay, this is what's happening here, here, here. These are the scenes. This is the major sort of tension builder. This is the climax. This is the resolution, and so on, right? So yeah, and I'll go over that basic outline in my head as much as I can. Then I'll write it down and I'll sort of write a bunch of different versions of it. Like I'll write one that's maybe like 3 paragraphs long, and then I'll expand that to like 3 pages, and then I'll expand that to like maybe 10 pages, right? And these are all just summaries of the story. And I guess in some way that's outlining it for me. So then from there, that's when I'll start writing everything out in the actual sort of manuscript. So yeah, I'm sort of, I guess, 2/3 of the way through the manuscript for the next one right now. And then when I'm done that, probably in a month or two, I'll go back and go over it one more time. And then, but yeah, I guess my process is to write more and expect to cut after, just for the sake of like, streamlining the story essentially, right? Not really wasting anybody's time, I guess, maybe that's where that oral sort of influence comes from, is like, you don't want to waste an elder's time, especially, right, if you have something to tell them, because they're important people. So yeah, maybe that's where that comes from. I don't know.
I was going to jump into Moon of the Crusted Snow, but before we do that, I'm very curious. So this is a new process for me with editing, which is while you're in the first draft, because I've asked guys like Joe R. Lansdale, Brennan does this, author Ronald Kelly, a few others will do the opposite of what I do, which has been for the last 8 years to write it all out, expect it to be shitty, and then make the second and so forth drafts, make it look like you knew what you were doing. A new approach that I've been introduced by those mentioned authors is write out however many words, the next day you edit, add more, and so forth. Are either of those processes ones you practice, or is there something different that you do?
I would say there's a bit of that latter practice in what I do. And that's because like the last thing I've written is what's going to be on my mind the next day immediately, right? So I'll wake up the next morning and think, holy shit, maybe I should go back and tweak that a little bit, before I forget about it. So sometimes what I do is like, I'll have, on one screen on the left side, the actual manuscript, and on the right side, I'll have just a document of notes, like chapter by chapter. And, and that'll be what I'll refer to on the next pass. In that I'll say, okay, chapter 12, go back and take a look at this particular detail or something like that, right? I do that sometimes, but if it's something that I feel is really pressing, then I'll go back and do that tweaking of the last thing I wrote. But yeah, mostly it's just to expect the same thing as you, like expect the first draft to be shittier, and then not really polish up the shit, because you don't want to serve up shit no matter what, right? But maybe sort of chip away at it and see if your dog like swallowed a diamond ring or something, and sort of let that emerge with the final draft, I guess.
Now, this book, audio listeners, I'm holding up Moon of the Crusted Snow. I love it. I love. I got mixed emotions, I want to say. It's horrific because as a New England boy, I went to South Jersey. It's not south enough, apparently, because it still snows here, but I've experienced some bad snow times, and that's horrifying to experience, never mind what you put your characters through. It's also a very beautiful cover. Look at that, man. It's so surreal. You just see a car. Again, kind of scary if you're in the car, but... I love it, but before we dive into the story, just one more question. Eden Robinson, I am not familiar with her. I see what she wrote. I see her blurb in the back. I'm curious. Why'd you Did you pick her for the blurb?
I asked her, for a blurb. She's been a very big influence on me, a big mentor, and fortunately, I've been very privileged to call her a friend in recent years. She's a Haisla Heilsuk author from the West Coast, and she has recently a trilogy out. It's called the Trickster series, and it's about like this young guy who learns that he's a trickster, that he's the son of a trickster. So it has like some, I guess, fantastical elements to it, but there's some horror too. Some of it is really scary. To you guys and your listeners, I'd recommend checking out the Trickster series, published here in Canada, and I think it's probably been published in the States too. I asked her if she would honor me with a blurb, and she was very kind to do so. And just very grateful for her and Richard Van Camp and the other blurbers, I guess you could say, Kevin Hardcastle and Warren Carreau. Just having that support and just knowing that there are people in your corner is just massive. And I try to pay that forward too as much as I can, because like we all start somewhere, right? And we all get taken under somebody's wing if we're fortunate enough to have that influence too. So just having her blurb that and being able to put that on the front is pretty awesome too, right?
That's great.
Yeah,
speaking of paying forward, I asked Shane, I'm paraphrasing myself, but I was like, I don't know if he's gonna want to do this, and he said Shane couldn't speak higher of you. He just said he's so friendly. Just talk to him, man. He does this all the time. So yeah, you certainly. It's nice when you hear that, but it's reassuring when someone actually they do it.
Yeah,
because actions speak louder than words, and there's always a disappointing hero that you look up to every now and then.
Well, I think like part of that is like the publishing world is so weird, and it's so hard to know how to crack it, right? And like you don't learn that in school. Like there is no course you can take to learn how to get published. It's through contacts, through friends that you're able to make. And if I didn't have people like that, I wouldn't have been able to become a published author. So yeah, I think it's my duty to be the person that others were for me going forward for the rest of my career.
I mean, I could say the same about pretty much everyone that's been on the show. I don't feel like I'd have as much fun without Brennan. I don't think I've had as much fun without our guest hosts. Yeah, you know what? Success, that's a team thing.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Totally agree.
Speaking of a team thing, I want to talk about your acknowledgments. We'll save that for last, but just a kind of a tidbit of that. You mentioned quite a few people that made it possible. So this book was certainly not a one-man journey. Can you tell us about what it took to write it, and then kind of go into, I don't want to ruin it, so we try to let the author explain what the story's about, so we don't ruin the surprise.
Yeah, so do you want me to talk about I guess the community that helped me create it first, and then talk about the story?
I would love that. Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Oh, well, geez, like it goes back to, all the people we mentioned already, who graciously offered words of encouragement for the actual cover. But it goes back to, my community, coming from a very supportive family, both on the res and in town, because as I mentioned, my dad's from the res and my mom's from town. Having a very supportive partner, my wife is always my first proofreader, and just having like people believe in me and trust me with writing about Anishinaabe experiences, because it's a hard thing to do. It's really difficult to determine what should be shared in this format and what shouldn't. And, there are some principles that I try to abide by. Like I only write about things that are already out in the public domain. I don't write about ceremonial things. I don't write about anybody else's personal trauma or anybody else's personal experiences, overcoming trauma or overcoming colonialism or anything like that. So yeah, there are these guidelines I set for myself, but I think those have been instilled in me by a supportive community that is not only protective of itself and of its customs and history, but also really wants to find a way to promote it and to teach other people about it. So yeah, that I think that's at the heart of anything that I really do. But on top of that, there are all kinds of like, I guess, industrial and I guess the industry types of people that really help you along the way. Like there's up here in Canada, we have great arts grants programs like the Canada Council for the Arts and the Ontario Arts Council. And I wouldn't have been able to write books without funding from those bodies. ECW Press, of course, the publisher of Moon of the Crusted Snow, and Susan Renouf, my editor, who was just phenomenal and really refining the story and getting it ready for the world. She was just amazing. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head who's holding the acknowledgements, but that's it basically comes down to trying to acknowledge as many people as possible who have supported me over the years. So but yeah, big one also is my dad, who he's an elder, an Anishinaabe elder, who shared a lot of stories with me. And just like, I guess that's a good segue into the actual story itself. Yeah, so for your listeners who aren't familiar with the story, and I suspect most of them, stateside anyway, because it's not as widely accessible in the States. But
I did see a picture with. Sorry to cut off. I just wanted to, for the listeners, this might further motivate them. Gabino Iglesias is a great picture of him holding your book, man.
Right. Yeah,
I love it.
That's great. I know. Yeah. I was really stoked to see that. That was really cool.
Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. No need to apologize. So Moon of the Crusted Snow basically is an end of the world story through the perspective of a Northern Ontario First Nation. And what happens is a sudden blackout occurs. Mysterious cause. Nobody knows why the lights and why the communications have gone out. But because this community is so far north, and because those infrastructures are relatively new to the community, it's not a huge of a shock, and it's not as big of an adjustment for them to sort of cope in sort of the days after the blackout, or even the weeks. But as the blackout drags on, it becomes clear that something serious has happened in the world to the south, and they don't really learn or get a glimpse of the severity of that until a couple of community members who are in college in one of the cities to the south come up and sort of tell them about the chaos that's going on as a result of the blackout. And then after that, some unwanted visitors from the city come up, and one of them in particular tries to exert his will upon the community and aims to manipulate and exploit the people in their weak state. And the community has to make some tough decisions about how it's going to survive and proceed. So I'll leave it there without giving too much away. But yeah, it's a post-apocalyptic, I guess, story in that genre. And for me, I was influenced by a lot of other stories, in that so-called canon, over the course of my life. And I just wanted to try to write one of my own because I always really liked looking at what would happen after the end of the world.
That's excellent. So looking at it from kind of a horror perspective, which, is kind of our thing. One of my favorite elements of a horror story, or any story that has horror elements, is not showing the monster, or showing the monster as little as possible. And that theme kind of works a couple ways in the book. One later on that, could be considered spoiler territory, but one up front would be that apocalypse. The whole idea of we're in this community and we have no idea what's going on. We don't, at first we think this is just kind of a rolling blackout, it'll be better in a couple hours and then a couple days. And we kind of experience it with the townspeople. Now, we realize there's 200 more pages, so it's probably not going to get sorted anytime soon. But what that creates, knowing what the characters know and only what the characters know, it creates this tremendous sense of isolation that just worked so well. So I wonder. It seems silly to ask was that intentional? Because I'm guessing it was intentional, but can you speak to kind of creating that atmosphere?
Yeah, it's really inspired by the blackout of 2003. And I'm not sure if you guys will remember that, but in August of 2003, there was this big widespread outage that impacted most of the eastern part of North America. And I was living in Toronto at the time, but that day I was back home on the res, house sitting for my dad and stepmom with my brothers because they were off on holidays. So the power went out, and it was weird because it was like a sunny summer day. That would only happen if there was a storm usually, right? Yeah, the afternoon dragged on and the lights still didn't come back on. So my brothers and I got into the car and went into town, neighboring Perry Sound, and saw that all the lights were out there and that all the stores were closed and so on. And we talked to some people that we knew, and they said, "Oh, we heard on the radio that this is all over the place. It's like Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Boston, New York, like everywhere, and it's like tens of millions of people. Nobody knows what caused it. Nobody knows if it's gonna come back on and so on." So my brothers and I went right back to the res and kind of went into survival mode. We're like, holy shit, this might be the big one. So let's sort of get our shit together, kind of. So we took an inventory of all the food in our dad's house. We collected firewood because like he had an electric stove in his house. We're like, well, that's not gonna work. So maybe we'll have to like cook our food over an open fire, kind of thing, right? So we totally went there, the night went on and the power still wasn't back on, and the next day same thing. So we were getting ready to go fishing because right on Georgian Bay there's a lot of fishing to be done. So we're like, okay, we're gonna have to eat fish from now on, and we're like, this is the end of the world, all right, and we're ready, kind of thing, eh? But then the power came back on, and we sort of forgot about our plan right away. But being in my community, even though we had no idea what was going on with the blackouts, we felt really safe because we knew what to do to feed ourselves. We knew who we could go to if we needed help otherwise. And there wasn't really any sense of panic that set in right away. It was just, flipping a switch and going to a place that we knew we could go to. That, we had the skills. We grew up with some of that sort of land-based living to allow us to survive if that was this sort of real scenario. So yeah, even though we didn't know what the cause was, we were kind of ready, and that sort of always stuck with me. Went back to Toronto to work a couple days later, and learned about some of the mild chaos that ensued there, like people lining up at the gas stations and so on, and emptying out some of the shelves at the grocery store and all that. So that's what really inspired me to sort of try to write something like that. In terms of the monster you don't see, I think that was of course intentional. I knew what caused the blackout in the story, and it wasn't really a question for me ever if I was going to reveal that. I always knew I was going to keep it hidden for that sake, because it just builds that tension in a pretty fun way if you're the writer. Like it's something you can hold back from the reader and just let them speculate over the course of 200 or so pages. And I find that scary myself as a reader. If you think of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, another post-apocalyptic novel, that you never find out what caused the end of the world, right? Even once it's done. So yeah, I really like that approach. And because I had this I guess economical sort of package of a story that there wasn't a whole lot of peeling back the curtain that I could do. I wanted to leave it that way. My editor Susan, as I mentioned, she really encouraged that too. But yeah, like in reality, my community, when I endured that blackout, was right beside a town just a couple hours north of Toronto, right? A big city. But if this happened in a far northern community, and everything was totally cut off, you wouldn't learn, maybe ever, what ended the world or what caused that particular blackout. So I think that's a bit of a dash of sort of a real a reality, I guess you could say, in that sense. And it was really fun to work with that. Absolutely.
I love that last point. I never even really considered that if you were truly in this position, the world could come crashing down everywhere else, and you never, short of engaging in the road type of road trip, you might never find out. You'd just be, powerless and living off fish and everything. That's really cool. Now, the other I also really liked the idea of using that to build tension. You said what caused this apocalypse, but you're not willing to share it. At least not yet. I don't know if that'll come in book 2, but the my take on that, and feel free to disagree, is that if you reveal it, no matter how clever it is, no matter how fitting it is to the story, probably 60 to 70% of your audience is going to be disappointed because they envisioned it a different way, or it just they would have done something different. Allowing their imagination to write in the rest of the story, to me, that's the best choice. And Patrick will always get on me when he reads my stuff because I enjoy ambiguity a lot more than he does in his writing. But yeah, no, I think that's a lot of good points. And I now that you've kind of given me that perspective, I can't really see it going any other way.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, and again, it was fun to do. It's like I have a secret that not a lot of other people have, and it's in some ways it's like my toy that I can play with, right? But yeah, with book 2, I have to reveal something, because if people have stuck around this long, that they're willing to invest more time with this story and my characters, and I feel I owe them at least some shred of an explanation, So yeah, I'm actually just like literally working through that right now.
It could always be a red herring too. You could just be fucking with us.
Yeah.
With what the reveal is.
Yeah, exactly.
I always, hey, look, man, I'm a writer too, and I don't know where the hell I'm going half the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Turns out it was the family of that moose from the opening scene all along.
Yeah.
They put paid to the rest of Canada and just worked their way down from there.
Exactly.
Maybe at some point in America, Stephen Graham Jones's Elks has something to do with cohersing with those moose.
Brandon, when you said that's the first thing I thought was Stephen Graham Jones book. The first thing I thought. That's hilarious.
You know what, man? I read that book a few months ago, and that's the only book that I've read by him so far. If I didn't have all these awesome authors coming on, then I probably would have poured through his whole bibliography. But my God, what a story!
Yeah, it's wild. That's the only book of his I've read too. But yeah, it blew me away. Amazing.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's exactly halfway through, but there is a point in that book when you're like, at least for me, I was like, I think I'm too dumb to understand this. And then I read a little bit more. I'm like, oh, I see what he's doing now. Wow, I've never read that before.
Yeah. Oh, that happened to me too. Exactly. I was like, am I really following this as I should be? And then I was like, okay, I think I get it now.
So what I loved about Moon is it's a creature, monster story, whatever word you want to use, but it's really a story about the crumbling of humans. And for, I don't know, maybe you or my sake even, or whoever's listening, horror for me anyways, it isn't one thing, it's everything. This is horror. It's real life horror, man. It's the crumbling of a society, a close-knit society. I mean, look at what happens, I don't know about up there, but when it snows really bad, especially in Jersey, because it's weird how unprepared they are. Like, I got trapped on my street a few years ago, and it was off of a main road for a week because they couldn't plow my street.
Oh, wow.
It's about 500 feet away from the main road. I'm like, I don't work at a place where they need me or nothing. That's fine. But people panic and they go after weird things, perishables, things that won't make any sense. So I don't think this gives anything away, but at one point the grocery store is out of product. And that's just one example. That's one Lego in the building of Legos. Yeah. I love that. I think it was Paul Tremblay that mentioned how the after effect, the aftermath, is usually the most interesting thing to see how the writer creates the rest of the story, and you nailed it, man.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that.
I just got to comment on your shirt. I love 9 Inch Nails. To me,
thanks.
Trent Reznor is like freaking Mozart, man. I love everything that guy does. Him and Atticus Ross really got a thing going on nowadays.
I listened to a lot of 9 Inch Nails when I was writing Moon of the Crescent Snow.
Just gotta ask that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you doing that with the sequel?
You know what? I haven't really figured out like my playlist for it yet. Yeah, I've weirdly been listening to a lot of classical music. Nothing in particular that I know of. The CBC has this stream or the show that comes on at 9 a.m, and that's usually when I start my writing. And I just leave it on, and it's like, okay, it's helping somehow. But no, I definitely got to think of like some, I guess, more thematic, lyrically music that can fit, the next part, because, with 9 Inch Nails, obviously, The Day the World Went Away, songs like that, right? Yeah.
Such a good song. I love when he remixes his own albums too, because they're great.
Yeah.
Now, it's weird. Like, I don't know how you go with music. Like, obviously you write to music and it's not always instrumental, because I know some authors won't write to anything but silence. Some write with only instrumentals. Me personally, it's weird. It's just what I can't predict it. Like I just turned in this short story that was heavily inspired by Candyman and Hellraiser, and it's about basically a train conductor that narrowly escapes a train crash that actually happened less than half a mile from me in 1880.
Oh, wow.
And I'm only listening to Alice in Chains, and I got no idea why. No connection.
Cool.
Brendan, you got any more questions for this book in particular, or you want to move on?
No, I mean I'll throw in that I don't think you can really necessarily nail down a process for what music inspires what you're working on. You just kind of gotta roll with it, and if it's all Alice in Chains, it's all Alice in Chains.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you mentioned that you're more than halfway through the manuscript for the new one. So I'd imagine there's probably not much you can tell us about it, but anything you want to share, we're open to. And I wondered if you could talk about getting hooked up with Penguin Random House Canada.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can tell you a bit about the sequel. Basically, getting hooked up with Penguin Random House is what, I guess, pushed the sequel along. And I didn't plan on writing a sequel to this when I originally finished it. I literally thought, okay, they're riding off into the sunset, and I won't give anything away about the ending, but that's sort of how I felt about it, and mostly because like I'd spent so much time, trying to dream up the story and then trying to write it, because I was working full time as a journalist for CBC, right? I did my writing in my spare time, and, it took a lot of sort of creative energy when I didn't have a lot left in the tank, right? So I was like, oh, if it took me that long to work this out, then I don't think I can, take it any further. But I was connected with an agent named Denise Bukowski after Moon of the Crusted Snow was published, and she got in touch with me because the book got a little bit of buzz here in Canada, and she said, "Do you have any representation?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, do you want to try to get a sequel to Moon of the Crusted Snow out there?" And I was like, well, I actually haven't really thought of that yet, but if you think you can find some interest, then giddy up, let's go, right? And that's when I started really trying to develop what a part 2 would look like. And I had to think really hard about what a compelling story would be in the sort of aftermath, because Moon of the Crescent Snow is about the moment, right? It's about the ending moment and survival in that immediate aftermath. So a next part of the story would logically have to resume in this world a time after, to show what has been created in this aftermath, So she found interest at Penguin Random House, and what they did at first was paired me with an editor before anything was ever signed, because they wanted to feel me out. They wanted to see if there was a story there that they could do. So his name's Rick Meyer, and I'm working with him right now, and he was great. We just had a phone call once a month, and he would just ask me, what are you thinking for the sequel? How would the story look? Where is the conflict? Where are the challenges for these characters? And eventually I came up with something for him, and then they offered me a contract, and the advance was good enough that I could buy some time for a few months, and I decided to leave my job at CBC. So it all worked out really well, and I feel very fortunate that the sort of cards fell that way, because it all coincided with like the start of the pandemic, and working at CBC was pretty tough then, because all you're covering is the pandemic, right? Like there's hardly anything else to talk about, and I was like, holy shit. And to think of still doing that a year later, like, oh man. But anyway, yeah, so we got to that point, and the story basically is about 10 years after the end of the first book, and yeah, this won't give too much away, but in the first book, it's revealed that this community originally lived on the Great Lakes. They were displaced to far northern Ontario as a result of just quote unquote Indian removal that happened all across this continent, right? So in part 2, they decide that they're sort of depleting their resources in the north, where they've been for a long time, and that they decide they want to go south to see what's left of the world, and also hopefully reclaim their original home on Georgian Bay. So wow. Yeah, so a group of 6 of them, and I won't say who because then I'll give away the ending of the story, but a group of 6 of them goes on this quest. So it's basically a quest story to see what's left of the world and try to go back home, essentially.
Oh man, I had no clue when I heard there was a sequel what you were going. That's cool.
No,
that sounds very cool.
It's fun. It's fun to work it through, because again, I had to dream up this whole other story, this whole other part too, right? But fortunately, the world is already built, the characters are already there. So there's obviously no backstory, no background I have to dream up, because there's a whole other book that's already been written, So yeah, so it's fun in that sense. But it's like, it feels a little rushed, because it took me 5-6 years to dream up and then write Moon of the Crusted Snow, and now I'm doing this in less than a year, right? So we'll see how it goes. It's fun though to be able to do it full time.
Yeah, because Moon was published in 2015?
2018.
Yeah, 2015 from.
Your Google is broken.
I didn't do my homework correctly. Oh, and there's a little. How do you pronounce your son's name? Because it says "to my son," and I don't want to butcher it.
Oh, Jequis.
Jequis, okay. Yeah. Oh, that's a cool name, man.
Yeah, thanks.
And then what's your? I want to talk about this later, but hey, screw it. We'll do it now. What's your little guy's name?
His name's Iabe. So Jequis and Iabe, and they're Ojibwe names. Jequis basically means firstborn or older brother, and Iabe means deer or buck. So yeah, it's the custom in our family. The way we do it is I ask my dad to name them, and he sort of comes up with their names. So it takes the pressure off us anyway, me and my wife.
And please tell me if I butchered it, but Yahweh, how old is he? Because he seems like he's pretty close to my kid's age.
Yeah, I think so. He's gonna be 10 months in a couple weeks. Yeah. How's your little guy again?
Philip was born in November of 2019, so he's 16 months old.
Okay, cool.
It's so weird, man. Our kids, all they know is people in masks outside. Yeah. I would like to be in their brain to just kind of figure out the story.
Yeah. Well, even our Yabe, he was born in June, right? Right as the pandemic was peaking or taking off, and he hasn't really seen other babies. He hasn't really been around them. He's barely been around family. He sees them all the time on screens, right? But I mean, who knows how that impacts him, right? I guess we'll see at the end of all this, but it's bizarre. So weird.
The little guy has seen very few kids, and like he's seen only recently a close friend's kid who's 4, and he just wanted to hold her hand and hug
Oh
her. And
yeah.
I was like, that's so cute. Kids are great. We're getting way off track, man. I don't even know where the hell this was going. I love seeing new parents' pictures, though, especially when they're around my kids' age, because I don't know, I just like to see what other kids are up to.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I like to see how other writer parents are with their kids. I mean, how's yours with? It's probably too young, but does he pick up books, or does he find any fascination in those at this point?
Not really, but his older brother Jequist definitely does. Like we share books with him from the beginning, and we'll do the same thing with the Abe as soon as he sort of takes an interest in them. But yeah, Jequist loves books, and he's in school now. It's his first year of kindergarten. And again, as you're saying with like the new experiences, like he just started school, but everybody in school wears masks, right? So that's all he knows at this point, but at this point here in Sudbury, in Northern Ontario, we're in a lockdown, so school's all online at the moment. So that's been a bit of a challenge in terms of actually like trying to write too. It's like, getting him online with his school and then figuring out how to get writing done after that. But we make it work, right? We make do.
Absolutely. Now, the one thing that stuck out to me when you were talking about the actual writing of Moon was the funding part. What is that, man? Because I don't think we got that here in the States.
Yeah, I know, and I hear that from American writers all the time. Like we have some pretty big funding bodies here in Canada. The main one is the Canada Council for the Arts, and I don't know what their overall budget is, but it's a lot. And they have money that they just give out to artists, whether it's playwrights or actors or musicians or authors or organizations in communities. So yeah, you can apply for grants every once in a while. And I've been funded, I think, 4 times by the Canada Council over the last like 15 years or so. And basically they'll just give you money to write or to focus on your artistic practice. So yeah, as a writer, basically you ask for money, you sort of pitch a project to them. You say, this is what, I want to do. I'm sort of dreaming up a novel about this, and I'd like some money just to spend some time doing some writing or some researching. And if they like your proposal, they'll give you the money, right? So it's not always easy. It's not as easy as just asking, it's a big, long, intense application process. And then you have to get adjudicated, right? And hundreds of people apply for each program every year. But yeah, that has been huge for me. And when I was working at CBC, if I got a grant, I was able to go on unpaid leave from CBC and then just spend a few months just writing full time. And yeah, I wouldn't have been able to, well, it would have taken a lot longer, because I would have just been confined to my evenings and weekends if I wasn't able to take those leaves of absence. So yeah, there's the Canada Council for the Arts, and then all the provinces have their own arts councils, like the Ontario Arts Council where I live. They've been very generous to me over the years too in giving me grants. So yeah, it's, from what I gather, it's a different world in that sense from, the arts realm in the United States. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know what the solution is, and I think thankfully here in Canada, like those organizations or those institutions are sort of pillars, right, of the arts, and like no government would ever cut them because that would be hugely unpopular if they did. Right? So,
I heard Stan Lee say something. Brent, jump in just right after this, buddy. I heard Stan Lee say something about how picture the world without any art, no television, no art in any format. You go crazy. Everyone needs a little relief, and everyone loves art in one form or another. So for a government body to recognize that and actually fund it, that's incredible.
Yeah, very fortunate, as I said, for sure.
So smug with your with your author funding and your universal health care.
This is why Canadians are nicer.
No kidding. No, really, that program sounds incredible. And to also have the knowledge that the government wouldn't dare cut it because it would be such an unpopular decision. I mean, I have to imagine that if America enacted something like that, people would be chomping at the bit to cut it. you know? It's just very telling, the value on art and creating art for the betterment of society.
Yeah. Well, and also, you know, a lot of those institutions have begun to prioritize so-called marginalized communities like Indigenous artists or, Black artists or, new Canadians as they're known. And part of that is to also, like, I wouldn't say repair damage, but, put the spotlight where it's due, rather than keeping it on sort of the mainstream sort of myth of this Canadian pleasant identity, right? That isn't actually true, when you consider the treatment of Indigenous people and so on, right? But
I fucked up again. I'm sorry.
No. That's that's. But that's like how Canadians have been sort of that's the image they've been force fed too. Even me, like that's what I believed for a really long time until I really learned like the true history of what's gone on in this country. But at the same time too, to get back to your original point, yeah, it's a core value of supporting the arts that makes me proud to be Canadian too. Absolutely, right? So again, I'm very thankful that we have that kind of funding. Because that's how I sort of do my thing, So, of course, I wouldn't ever like publicly talk shit about the Canada Council for the Arts or the Ontario Arts Council or anything like that either, So,
Brennan, I found this interesting. Wob is both a Canadian fan of sports teams and an American fan of a different sports team. Okay. Now, where do you? I know you're a Buffalo Bills fan.
Yeah.
And you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other teams? Like what draws you to them?
Well, with the Leafs, it's very much like part of that sort of Canadian tradition, I guess, right? Grew up with that. My dad is a big Leafs fan, and it's just been part of, I guess, sort of my identity in many ways. The Bills, the interesting thing there is like we have the Canadian Football League, right? Mm-hmm. It's obviously not as big or as influential as the NFL, and I liked it growing up. Like Toronto has the Argonauts, that's their team, but I think back in the late 80s started getting Bills games on TV because we're sort of in like central southern Ontario, right? And I was like, this is so much better than the CFL. So that's how I became a Bills fan essentially. And still really enjoy it. In terms of basketball, eventually like we got the Toronto Raptors back in the mid 90s too, right? So that became my basketball team. So yeah. But yeah, sports, like it's funny, eh? Like ultimately they don't really have any sort of bearing on my day-to-day life there, but I've been following sports since the beginning. So it's more or less like a fun distraction. Although like being a Leafs fan or a Bills fan, like they always lose in the end. So it's like, why the hell am I doing this to myself, man? Like pouring 3 hours of my night into just getting pissed off in the end. But I guess that's part of the process too.
I am sorry you had to watch Buffalo lose to our Patriots for like 20 years straight.
Oh man, I know. Yeah.
Hey, tables have turned though.
Yeah.
My paternal grandfather, so I'm from Massachusetts. I grew up all Boston sports teams, but my paternal grandfather was a Giants fan and a Pats fan, which went to my dad and then me. One of my favorite players is Mike Strahan. I always butcher his last name. Mike Strahan.
Oh yeah, cool.
Just super nice guy, and he kicked ass on the field. What's not to like, But the reason my grandfather liked him, that team, the Giants, was because they were the only team that aired. The Pats didn't air in the early days when he used to watch. They sucked. But then 2007 came around, and I'm like, why am I doing this? I can't anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna say that must have been a weird year for you, right? That Super Bowl.
Yeah, then 2011 came. They're like, hey, here's another reason. So the anthology with Shane Hawk. Is there anything that you can tell us about that? Because I thought something was public about it.
I don't know. He sent me an email recently, just sort of giving an update on where things were with a list of potential contributors. I can't remember if I'm allowed to say who's all on there or not. I probably shouldn't. I'm on there. I can say that anyway.
Yeah, don't worry about the others.
But yeah, when he reached out to me, I was like, holy shit, this is a cool idea. And I immediately started thinking about where I was going to go and, how I would sort of, contribute something to this anthology. And the first thing I thought was like, my grandma used to tell me scary ass stories when I was a kid, just like these old Ojibwe horror stories, and I was like, I wonder if I should go there in some way. And like immediately, because I don't think I've really specifically focused on something, I guess, in a sort of horror genre in terms of a short story ever, right? And so to me, like the possibilities seem kind of endless, and I'm just really eager to actually write something and to see the whole anthology come together.
I would love to read a short story about you, especially with, again, Indigenous horror, which is what I believe the anthology focuses on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in pretty much a few towns over from where Brennan grew up, and it's in southeastern Massachusetts. Boston's was 30 miles north, Providence like 30-something miles south. Plymouth, Massachusetts was, I don't know, an hour drive away from me. So we grew up in Wampanoag territory, and I'm, again, fascinated with history. What you learn on your own outside of school, oh my goodness, it just blew me away when I first learned about King Philip's War, Metacomet, how it was the bloodiest per capita on American soil ever, more than the Civil War. I bring up how fucking crazy the truth is so much that I annoy the hell out of my wife. She's like, yeah, I know, Pat. What are you going to do about it? I'm like, nothing. I'm just pissed off. So the stories I read there, man, there's some interesting stuff, and there's just so many tribes. I want to see more of it. I want to read more of it. Is there anyone that you can promote or that you want to talk about? Like we've talked about Stephen Graham Jones. Shane Hawk is coming out with quite a few interesting stuff. And then Tommy Orange, he's got there. I don't know what else he has. So is there any other Indigenous authors that you would like to personally promote?
Oh yeah, lots. And I'm always scared about getting this question because I don't want to leave anybody out, right?
Oh, you are.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I one good friend of mine, his name's Richard Van Camp. He's a Tlitcho author from the north, from the Northwest Territories originally, and he has some stories that I would say qualify as horror. Some short stories. He has this short story collection called "Godless but Loyal to Heaven," which came out maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But he's really inspired by a lot of the traditional stories, and he really incorporates some of the scarier elements into some of them. That's not all he does, though. He does basically all kinds of genres. But I just talked to him today, so that's why he's top of mind. But yeah, I was influenced by so many great authors like Louise Erdrich, an Ojibwe author from what's known as I think Minnesota or Michigan. I can't remember exactly. Apologies to Louise and her family that I don't remember exactly where they're from, but they're Ojibwe. They're in Anishinaabe, anyways. Who else? Joshua Whitehead. He's a Cree and Ojibwe author from out west on the plains. Geez, so many more. Alicia Elliott is Six Nations author, works in nonfiction, but in terms of like revealing truths, as you're saying, like she does an excellent job of just really contextualizing history and showing these past horrors and how they sort of persist today, like how they continue to cause problems, right, for Indigenous people. So I could go on and on and on, but off the top of my head, that's who comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, just in Wampanoag territory, I think it was the Massachusetts government just reclaimed over 100 acres of land that they gave back to the tribes that were there before colonists stole it.
Yeah,
that was in 2020, man. It's fucking crazy. Brennan, how about you take us away, man?
So I've got a question in regards to Indigenous authors. If we've got a listener who is kind of unsure about taking on horror, sci-fi, any kind of genre fiction from an Indigenous author because they're concerned they might not be able to relate to it. What kind of message would you want to send a potential reader like that?
Oh, that's thanks for bringing that up, Brennan. I think that's a really important point to highlight. And I'm always thinking about this because it's a question I get a lot if I'm doing like a panel discussion or if I'm being interviewed by the media. And I think every other Indigenous author or any other author who's not sort of part of the so-called mainstream gets this. And the question is like, who are you writing for? Are you writing for your people or are you writing for quote unquote everybody else? And that's a really difficult position to put authors in because it sort of makes them choose who their audience is in a public way, right? And in that sense, it sort of creates a divide between potential readership. You know, if I say, oh, I wrote Moon of the Crusted Snow for Anishinaabe people so that they could, have something of their own they could read, then everybody else would be like, well, I'm not going to get this, so why would I even bother trying to pick it up? And then the other sort of misconception is if I say, well, I wrote this for everybody else to sort of understand Anishinaabe culture. In that sense, it could alienate some Anishinaabe people who would say, well, I know about that, so why am I going to read it? So it's not that binary, though. It's not that black and white. And there's a lot more nuance in storytelling that I think everybody really needs to consider. And that's what I would remind people who would be going into, I guess, trying to read works by Indigenous authors is that, to be a writer, to be a storyteller, you really dive into the gray areas, right? And you grab onto those things that anybody could relate with in those gray areas. And that's the beauty of it. You sort of get into the mud and you sort of thrash about finding those things that, you hope to connect with readers. Because overall, you want to invoke empathy in a reader and you want to convey humanity because that's what's connecting everybody to each other. If they choose to engage with other humans through art, that's what they want, So to back up just a little bit, if living life as a human, regardless of your race or culture or whatever else, is very much a spectrum. There's not one way to be Anishinaabe or to be white, or there's not one way to go about understanding that way of life or to heal, to get back to that way of life if it was taken from you, right? It's a spectrum, and there's all sorts of things to consider when you're presenting something for, I guess, readership or viewers or listeners or anybody else to try to engage with what you're creating. I think my peers and what I'm trying to get at the heart of is just these human experiences to convey what we have endured and what we have encountered as people, not just as colonized or displaced people, but as people who want to raise kids in a good way, people who are proud of their culture, who are proud of their history, and so on. So yeah, in that sense, like I relate to reading experiences of other Indigenous nations. Even a book like Tommy Orange's There. I don't know what it's like to be an Indigenous person in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I know what it's like to be, just a person trying to make a go of it in a city. So that's what I'm going to look for in that story. And then I'm going to learn about what that particular experience is, right? So I think, yeah, like that question is an important one to ask because it can be daunting because you don't know what you don't know, right? As the old saying goes, and you don't know what you're going to get into or how something is going to make you feel if you're not familiar with it at all. But you both can relate with this, I know, because you want to write a good story and you want readers to connect with what you're writing. So yeah, I would just tell readers who aren't familiar with Indigenous literature is humanity is at the core of it. And what I think we're trying to do, and I don't speak for everybody, is that we're just trying to make our fellow people be proud of themselves and see themselves represented in literature, and also to teach other people about those ways of life at the same time, because that can be a thing. Both of those things can happen at the same time, right? So yeah. So those would be my words for potential readers.
That's a damn good answer. And there's a lot of great stuff in there. The one I really latched on to was humanity's at the core of it. we're telling stories about people. And if you're somebody like me who reads upwards of 100 books a year, reading stories about people that come through a variety of different lenses, different experiences, different places in the world, it's just necessary. Otherwise, you're going to get burned out reading the same thing over and over and over again.
I agree. Yeah, good point.
All right, so I was just thinking about this when you were answering Brendan's question. I know you don't speak for everyone. Your personal opinion, how do you feel about non-Indigenous people writing in any capacity, be it a secondary character, a one-off character, or a point of view character through Indigenous eyes?
Oh, good question. I'm fine answering this question because it's something I discuss often with all kinds of people. Yeah, short answer, I believe a non-Indigenous person can write about Indigenous people or Indigenous experiences. It's very complicated, though, and it's a process that I think the writer really needs to engage with in a respectful and meaningful way. So I guess one thing that I really don't think should happen, or that I'm not comfortable with, is a non-Indigenous person writing from an Indigenous point of view. At this point in our world, I don't think that's something that can be just researched and then written about, because it is an authentic, very complicated experience that I believe has to be lived. I don't believe it's something that can be just dropped into and then written about. Secondary characters or other characters on the fringe, absolutely. I believe they do need to be included in stories written by non-Indigenous authors. However, that author needs to do some work ahead of time to ensure that character is reflected properly and doesn't just become, I guess, a wallflower or just a diversity sort of quota checkmark kind of thing, right? For the sake of their story, So how that works, I think, it can be in different ways, Of course, I think ultimately what should happen is the non-Indigenous author should spend some time with actual Indigenous people from a particular culture that they want to write about, or from a particular community, visit with them, learn about them, learn their history, learn about the treaty that may cover where they're living, learn about, some of their particular customs and so on. Learn about, the traumas that endure as a result of being displaced and so on, right? And it's not like, what people need to be mindful of is that Indigenous people have been taken from since settlers arrived on this continent, right? First their land was taken, and then once they were removed from their land, resources were taken from that land, whether was through mining or forestry or agriculture or whatever else. Up here in Canada, and this existed in the United States as well, children were taken away from communities to have their culture erased from them. And up here it was in residential schools, and in the States it was in boarding schools, right? So you had this successive wave of being taken from, of things being stolen from you. So what a non-Indigenous storyteller needs to be mindful of is not taking a story from a community or a people, not perpetuating that cycle, and being mindful of that relationship, because Indigenous communities have lost so much. They've lost language, they've lost culture, they've lost their drums, they've lost their ceremonial items, and so on. So I think that can happen in a good way, though, if an author or a writer is forthright about what their intentions are, and as long as it's engaged with in a good way, then that can absolutely happen, for sure. But that relationship has to be built first, because that's one thing that hasn't really happened, despite everything, in both Canada and in the United States. Indigenous nations believed in many ways that they were entering into good faith agreements with the settler authorities, but that didn't happen happen at all, right?
Right,
so yeah, it's just a matter of not perpetuating that cycle. So yeah, that's a very long answer to your question, but I think it's really complicated. And basically what I would just advise people is just be a good person about it. Go into it with an open mind, prepare to give back if you're planning on taking some details or some information or some stories, and try to create something together. Make it a collective sort of communal experience. Because we've mentioned this already earlier in the show, that everything we create as writers is a result of a community. There are people behind us. So I think that's what all writers need to be mindful of if they're planning on writing about Indigenous experiences and people.
That, you know what? I love it when authors give long answers and they apologize for it. It's like me and Brennan and the listeners crave for that, man. If you were just like, nah, or yeah, I feel like, oh, okay, well, I don't get it. Thank you for that, man. It gave me a lot to think about too. And I was gonna wait until we were talking privately, but this might help someone. I've got a story in my head with the tribe that is still in the area where I grew up in, the Wampanoag. So it gave me a lot to think about as well. Gave me some ideas and directions, and I always thought that the very most you want to be respectful, because we're all storytellers. But yeah, it's certainly appreciated that you gave me your point of view. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. And I'm happy to discuss this any other time if anybody ever wants to reach out. I mean, the way I look at it is not like the one way to do it. And a lot of people might disagree with me. Some people might say, no, you shouldn't write about Indigenous people at all. But in that sense, like, I believe you're not properly reflecting reality. And you're, I think, furthering the erasure of Indigenous people if you disallow non-Indigenous people to even go into those areas. So yeah, like, we could talk for hours about this, but it's a good subject. Absolutely.
The thing that I never understood, and it's my opinion that if you feel what I'm about to say, then I don't think you get storytelling, is when someone says pretty much just write about who and what and this and that, in the sense where it's like, me and Brendan, we're white Irish Americans, just write about that or whatnot. It's like, well, that's not a storyteller. I'd be very limited, and then I would get shit for just writing about that. You can't win.
No, and that's the thing too, though. It's about your own perspective, and even though I'm writing specifically about Anishinaabe people, my perspective is still limited too. I'm a cis hetero guy writing mostly about cis hetero people, and in Moon of the Crusted Snow, like, I should have probably explored some gender diversity a little bit, or some relationship diversity too. So I think having an opportunity to explore that a little more in a sequel is not necessarily like righting any wrongs. It's just about providing a sort of more realistic snapshot of what a community can look like. So yeah, I think, yeah, we should definitely look outside of our own perspectives, but I think just think about the communities that we inhabit. Most communities have some diversity in some degree. So yeah, as storytellers, it's imperative that we reflect that.
In our episode 68, Accept and Rejection, with Gabino Iglesias, Joe Lansdale, S.A. Cosby, and Cian Pelayo, this subject's brought up too. Joe brings it up, but Gabino said it perfectly. He's like, there's not one whatever experience. There's not one black or white, because, he brought up the black experience. It's not the same from a kid in Brooklyn to a girl in Jamaica to someone growing up on the farm, or someone in Britain, and so on and so on. It's a great point. And you're just kind of saying a similar thing, and I love it, man, because there's a lot of strong opinions online, especially from a lot of people that I'm like, I don't know. That's why I ask these questions, and that's why I do it for the episode, just to allow people the opportunity to hear, Indigenous or Black or Latinx or whatever, what have you. Someone that's not me. Someone that's not It's a straight white dude.
Well, the conversation is the excellent starting point. That's being a considerate person, is having that talk beforehand. Otherwise, I think what we have seen over the course of the so-called canon of literature is mostly white dudes just saying, fuck it, I can write about whatever I want, and that's, a big problem. But, just considering the different perspectives in the first place is a huge, I guess, sort of advancement or a huge progression over, what used to be, I guess, in the industry.
I feel like it's going to make, a better writer, not just for me, but for whoever. Like the last 2 years that me and Brendan have really dove into this community, we've had so many different voices come on the show, talk to us in general, off here, on here, and it's making me, I feel like, a better writer, a better person, a better friend, father, which is one of the most important things to me.
Cool.
Because, you're a dad. Brendan's a dad. What do you want to teach your boys? To be better people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
Brendan, what do you got for us, sir?
My big takeaway is you mentioned in, when you're writing the sequel, having the opportunity to explore different types of relationships or gender issues and stuff like that, because that's the picture, that's the snapshot of the community, and I think that's the point right there, is writing only slightly altered versions of who you are doesn't accurately reflect really any community. God, can you imagine a community full of people that look exactly like Pat? What a horrifying place.
That's my worst nightmare.
But seriously, it's to accurately reflect, even if where everybody lives is not going to be exactly the same, there's always going to be a diversity, whether it's through gender identity, whether it's through different types of relationships, whether it's through skin color, whether it's through culture. And to constantly paint your backgrounds, your supporting characters as pretty much just different sides of the same mirror, it's no good.
Yeah,
it's not interesting, and it's not accurate, it's not authentic.
Well, yeah, and it's also go ahead, Patrick.
I was just going to make a joke saying, imagine Lord of the Rings with just hobbits.
Well, yeah, the only thing I was going to say is it's not realistic either, because I think that would be a pretty big tell if everybody was just various versions of the same mirror, as you said, Brendan. Like, you would be able to see that that person may not have as wide a perspective of the world as everybody else does. And the thing is, like, we're so connected to different experiences nowadays because of social media and because of just digital media and mainstream media in general, that that narrow scope isn't as realistic, I don't think, as it has been portrayed in literature of the past, right? So,
you know what? I'd love to jump into a new venture with you, man. You and author Jennifer David, has a new podcast called Storytellers. Please tell us about that, man. Plug away.
Yeah, well, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, it's my first foray into podcasting, and obviously I'm inspired by all the great podcasts about writing, like you guys. But yeah, Jennifer, she we're like not really friends, like we're acquaintances, right? We knew each other because of working and living in Ottawa, where my wife and I used to live. And she reached out saying, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast about Indigenous books?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so. I think I'd be into that." And this was just after I left CBC last year, and we had to do some research, but the way she presented it to me was just, we'll do it once a month. We'll just talk about one book by an Indigenous author. We'll maybe bring a guest host in to talk about what that book means to them, and we'll see how it goes. So we've only had one episode out so far, but it has had a pretty good response, and we'll have another episode coming out very shortly with a guest host. But it's been really cool. I've really enjoyed it. And it's like what we're doing now, you know, and we're just having a chat about things we're interested in, you know, talking about writing and books and so on. And I've never really had that opportunity before, you know, in a sort of, I guess, creative sense. And you know, it feels for me, and you mentioned this, like you learn all the time from all the writers you have in, like it's a way to like publicly learn in real time. Like we recorded you know, our next episode just the other day, and I'm like, you know, having my mind blown as we talk, and I could have never done that before, you know. So yeah, it's been super fun, and we'll see how it goes. You know, we're gonna keep it going as long as we can, but we mostly just want to make it an enjoyable process, like as a side project for us, you know, because you know she has a primary gig, and so do I. But yeah, it's called Story Keepers. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Our website is called storykeeperspodcast.ca, and you can see a list of the books that we're going to be discussing over the next little while. And yeah, so please subscribe and check it out.
That's awesome. I apologize. It says Storytellers. Is Story Keepers on app? You might have just said this. If you did, I apologize. Is it on Apple Podcasts?
Yes, it is. And no, you didn't ask that. Yeah, it's on Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify. It's on most of the big ones, I think. So
perfect. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna subscribe after this. Let's get into what are you reading right now? What are you reading right now, Wob?
Well, I am reading. I mentioned Eden Robinson's Return of the Trickster. That's the third book in her Trickster trilogy. That's what I'm reading right now, and we are going to be discussing that in May for Story Keepers. So that's that. I just finished. I did Blood Meridian. Cormac McCarthy did a reread of that recently for some weird reason. But yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to reread it was because I really liked how he wrote about the land itself and how he wrote about movement through the land. And, you know, that's sort of what I'm trying to do with the sequel to Moon of the Crested Snow, right? So I sort of turned to it for inspiration, but it's like a pretty messed up book to say you're inspired by it because, you know, it is such a violent book. But yeah, that's what I last read before this. And after Return of the Trickster, I don't know. I'll have to take a look at my pile. It's at the bedside as usual, you know. So,
you know what, man, it's okay. Like you're talking to your people because after I read The Girl Next Door, I was like, I told Bram like I love this book, and then I was like, ooh, I don't know if I want to say that because it's kind of fucked up. But then we talked to some people, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, it's a fucked up story, but it's powerful. It's in the context of the type of story, it's the most powerful thing I think I'll ever read of that nature.
Yeah.
So I do love it. I love the writing. But if I told like someone that doesn't love reading and they're like, "What's it about?" I'd be like, "Nah."
Yeah. Or even something like I don't know, like Choke by Chuck Palahniuk. You know, how would you explain that to just a casual reader too? You know.
I just read Guts, that haunted. The novel Haunted, and Guts is in that.
Oh,
first time.
Yeah.
My asshole still puckers up every.
Now, every time whenever I'm near a pool, I'm like, oh god.
Now, I guess this is a good reminder. Now, we're recording with Wob on April 30th. We're talking with Chuck in 3 days.
Still March, by the way.
Chronological order, this episode comes 2 episodes after his. So check out his episode. I don't know what we're talking about because we haven't recorded it yet. But yeah, read Guts.
That's cool. You guys are talking to Chuck, eh?
It's we'll mention him on the episode, but a listener and a friend of the show, Tyler Jones, is friends with him in real life, and
no way, that's cool.
Yeah, very thankful for that.
Wow, that's awesome.
Trying to find a connection for Clive Barker. That'd be awesome.
Holy shit, that'd be awesome too.
Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna happen. Brennan, what are you reading?
You know, I think I'm due for a reread of Blood Meridian. That sounds good. I'll have that.
I've never read that. That sounds really good.
Oh, you'd like it, man. You'd like it.
You'd like it. It's
just
gorgeous.
Started this monster. Malignant Summer from Tim Meyer. Just under 600 pages. and I'm about 7 pages in, so I got a little ways to go. But hell of an introduction, and it's that kind of it's that coming of age subgenre, I guess is the best word. Who knows words anymore, but it has that kind of it takes place in 1998. So in 1998 I'd have been 13 years old. Like this speaks to me. As cool as it is when everything was taking place in the 80s, love the 80s. I was 5 when the 80s ended. So this is, now that we're seeing coming of age horror fiction with 12-year-olds in the late 1990s, like this is my jam.
Cool.
I hope we hang out here for a while.
I'm reading The Paradox Twins I love that cover. I can't look, it's pretty.
Yeah, it is.
It's weird for some guys to hear that. Like every guy at my work would probably be like, they'd say a lot of stuff that I'm not going to repeat, but I think it's pretty. I love it. It's a beautiful cover. That and Lullaby by Chuck. This is my 4th Chuck Palahniuk book. I'm listening to audiobooks right now because due to everything that, new family, full-time job, trying to write and shit, audiobooks are my best friend. I listen to Moon of the I own it, but I listened to the audiobook version of Moon. I meant to bring that up. Bill Murrasti.
Yeah.
He did a good job.
Oh, he did a great job. Yeah.
Whenever he repeated one of the elders saying fuck, it made me laugh every time. But this is the 4th Chuck Palahniuk book I'm reading in 2 weeks. And it's seeping into my own fiction now. I'm like, where did this come from? I like it. I'm gonna roll with it. It's fantastic.
You gotta space that shit out, man. You're gonna need like rehab after this.
I'm pretty sure if I read one more book by him within the span of a month, I don't know, man. I'm gonna need some mental evaluations. So we've already asked pretty much what your upcoming projects are. Where can people follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Waub, at WAUB. Also on Instagram, same handle, at WAUB. On Facebook, at Waubgeshig Rice, WAUBGESHIGRICE. I have a personal website, it's just waub.ca, WAUB.ca. I haven't updated it in a while, though, so there's not a whole lot there, but, it's just with a blog, it's, the thing that you always say you're going to get to, but don't always... because of other stuff on the go. But yeah, that's my digital presence basically right there.
It looks like you have 2 Facebook pages and they're both like fan pages.
Oh yeah, I have a personal one and an author one. I try to keep most of the writing stuff to the author one. It's just a picture of me in like a black hoodie. And the personal one's with me and my Yabe, my second son. Yeah, I don't know how to manage Facebook. That's the hard thing, though, man. So it's like it's an ongoing dilemma,
I saw this funny thing. It wasn't even a meme. It was just something about how MySpace Tom never fucked us with our security, but Zuckerberg did.
Yeah.
And my wife and I were watching. What was it? We were watching something recently where, God, I can't think of it for the life of me. Where it was basically someone that took a bit. Oh yeah, that's right. McDonald's. We watched The Founder, where Ray Kroc, I think that's the guy that took McDonald's from the 2 brothers and basically cut them out to make any money. And I'm just thinking, like, apparently you got to be an asshole if you're really, really smart. Because I'm thinking of like Steve Jobs fucked his friends. Zuckerberg fucked the twins that helped him get Facebook going. But not MySpace Tom.
No, that's right.
Tom would that.
Yeah.
Tom didn't get the movie deals. What's up with that? A reminder to everyone, Dead Headspace. It's late recording this, so I apologize. The Dead Headspace. Dead Headspace has a merch store now. All you got to do is, I'm just going to say go on Google Dead Headspace merch because I don't know what the link is on the top of my head. Where we have a mask with my goofy mug on it, a coffee mug with my mug on it, a few other things. with my mug on it. So check that out. Final thoughts, Brennan.
You can also go on deadheadspace.com and it links right to the store from there.
Nailed it. That was much more concise. Brennan, any final thoughts?
You left us with the store, like, just go Google it. No, I don't. My final thoughts are, Wob, I appreciate your time, spending almost 2 hours with us, listening to our bullshit and giving us some really, really good, thoughtful answers. Appreciate every minute, man.
I'm honored to be able to bullshit with you guys. This was a super fun conversation. Just really appreciate the opportunity. Really encouraged by, your enthusiasm for my book and some of the things that I had to share. I'm very grateful for an opportunity like this, and to be on your show was super cool. And I just really enjoyed chatting with both of you guys. And yeah, just eager to keep this friendship going with you both, because this is pretty awesome.
Yeah, man. Before we recorded, I was telling Wob how nervous I was. I don't get that way with most guests. I did with Josh Mallerman. I did with the guys on the Host movie, and I did with you. So I don't know, man. You're super nice. I don't know what the hell the problem is, but yeah, your book was. It just had an impression on me. I want to read more. We want you back, especially for the sequel. Who knows? Maybe we'll get you for a nice little, I call them round tables, but I guess it's not when it's focused on one book. Maybe it is. I don't know. What do words mean?
Hey, I'll be there anytime. So yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks so much, man. And thank you everyone for listening. Next week, a week from now, Monday, I don't know the date, we'll be with Kathy Koja. And the previous episode was with Joshua Chaplinsky. Check that out. Before that, Chuck Palahniuk. Thank you for joining us. There's a lot of podcasts to listen to. We appreciate you picking this one. Have a good one. Hey, at this point, do you guys mind if we take a bathroom break? I wouldn't ask if we could stop and I could cut all this out, but I don't want to miss any of this.
No, you have to hold it.
I don't think my wife would find it very manly. My pants for
a podcast.